Hello, very good morning to you. Welcome to Breakfast with Dan Walker and Louise Minchin.
The headlines for you at 6 o'clock this morning. New petrol and diesel cars to be banned from sale after 2030 as part of the government's 10-point plan to tackle climate change.
Yes, ministers say 250,000 green industrial jobs could be created, but it demands a lot of change very quickly. Can businesses meet the challenge? I'll take a look.
Criticism for the way ministers handed out billions of pounds worth of contracts to buy PPE to tackle coronavirus. The watchdog says priority was given to firms recommended by MPs and political advisors.
Reunited with loved ones as trials of a new scheme to allow visits in care homes get underway will meet some of the first people to benefit.
To be able to communicate with her other than through a screen, or her being asked to come into the garden, be a seer in her own room, absolutely great.
Good morning. Calls for football to address the scandal of dementia in the game. England legend Geoff Hurst joins those calling for new restrictions on heading the ball.
Good morning. Today, once again, it's going to be a blustery day, windy for some. We've got rain moving from the west to the east. Still mild for most, but through the day in the west, the temperatures will start to fall. I'll have all the details in 10 minutes.
Good morning, it's Wednesday, it's the 18th of November. The top story for you this morning, this new cars and vans powered entirely by petrol or diesel will not be sold in the UK from 2030.
The plans are part of what the Prime Minister is calling a green industrial revolution aimed at tackling climate change. Our environment analyst Roger Harrabin has more.
The fuel pump on a slow journey towards the scrap heap. From 2030, the government will ban new cars powered only by petrol and diesel. New hybrids that run on petrol and electricity will still be allowed, and people can still drive conventional cars. It's part of a plan to steady the volatile climate. Planet-heating gases from modern society haven't caused the wildfires sweeping the world, but they have played a part. More nuclear energy is part of the government's solution. The Prime Minister wants jobs at the giant Sizewell C plant in Suffolk, although there are still hurdles to overcome, and no solution yet for nuclear waste. Offshore wind plays a key role too, producing enough electricity to power every home by 2030, supporting up to 60,000 jobs. Cities in the northeast should benefit. The government wants them to become new technology hubs for making wind turbines and creating the clean fuel hydrogen. House building will also have to play its part. From 2023, all new homes will need to be so cosy they don't require a gas boiler. As the new policies cut emissions, so the Prime Minister's road building plans will increase emissions. Critics say he should stop driving policies in the wrong direction and invest far more in putting the nation on track for a zero emissions future. Roger Harrabin, BBC News.
Ministers set aside normal standards of transparency as they scramble to secure £18 billion worth of PPE supplies and services at the start of the coronavirus pandemic.
That's one finding from a report by the government spending watchdog, the National Audit Office. It found that firms recommended by MPs and peers were given priority. Here's Andy Verity.
From the start of the pandemic to the end of July, government contracts worth £18 billion were awarded at high speed using emergency rules to bypass the normal competitive tendering process. Most of the contracts were to suppliers of personal protective equipment. The Independent National Audit Office said even in an emergency, it remained essential to public trust for the government to document why it had chosen a particular supplier and how it had managed any potential conflicts of interest. In a sample of 20 cases, it found repeated failures to do so. In one example highlighted by the NAO, a contract was awarded to the focus group organiser Public First, whose owners previously worked for the Cabinet Office Minister Michael Gove and alongside Boris Johnson's then top adviser Dominic Cummings. Yet the Cabinet Office failed to document any consideration of any potential conflicts of interest.
By not keeping proper records, by not being transparent about when those contracts were awarded and what they were doing, it lays the government open to these accusations, whether they're true or not. And certainly this weird VIP route through where certain companies got a closer look because they were recommended by MPs, peers, I mean, this is not something that MPs wanted, and yet it's happened. And the question is, did anyone know about it and put people through that route? And a lot of us would not have known that there was a fast-track route to recommend certain companies.
The NAO also confirmed that where ministers' offices, MPs or health chiefs recommended suppliers, their applications were fast-tracked. Public First said it was hired on a pay-as-you-go arrangement that meant it could be fired if it didn't perform well. The Cabinet Office said it welcomed the NAO's scrutiny and its recommendations for improvement, but declined to comment on the case of Public First. Andy Verity, BBC News.
And more on that later for you. Now, the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, is facing pressure to keep Jeremy Corbyn out of the party after criticism of yesterday's decision to reinstate him as a member.
He'd been suspended 3 weeks ago for saying the scale of anti-Semitism within Labour had been overstated. Let's speak now to our political correspondent, Layla Nathu. Let's just talk, first of all, about that, about party members. How are they reacting to this?
Morning, Lou. Well, predictably, this has divided the crowd very much. Supporters of Jeremy Corbyn in the parliamentary party, the unions that have been his allies, saying this is the right decision to bring him back in, that it's good for party unity. But his critics in the party and Jewish groups, certainly in Labour, are reacting furiously, saying this is the wrong call, and it makes a mockery of the Equalities report that found that Labour had acted unlawfully when it came to handling claims of anti-Semitism. They wanted an apology from Jeremy Corbyn for his reaction to that report, which was what got him suspended in the first place, saying that claims of anti-Semitism had been dramatically overstated by his opponents, and they wanted the complaint against Jeremy Corbyn to be handled under a new independent process that the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has promised to introduce in the new year. So clearly this has been a controversial decision. It was independent of the leadership, taken by the party's ruling body, a small committee there. But as I say, there is a new independent complaints procedure coming in the new year, Sir Keir Starmer is promising. But there is now a question for the Labour leadership as to whether Jeremy Corbyn becomes a member again of the parliamentary Labour Party, sitting as a Labour MP rather than just coming as a rank-and-file Labour Party member.
Later on today, there's a bit of history being made by the Prime Minister in Prime Minister's Questions, isn't there?
Yes, Boris Johnson is going to be taking questions from MPs virtually because, remember, he is isolating in Downing Street after coming into contact with an MP earlier who has subsequently tested positive for coronavirus. He has had a negative test, but Downing Street say he is going to be self-isolating in line with the guidance. So there is going to be a virtual PMQ. Sir Keir Starmer is going to be there in person, but there have been the calls for greater virtual participation across Parliament. One of the unions is saying, look, there shouldn't be an exception made for the Prime Minister. We should have more virtual participation. Certainly, there's a move to try and include vulnerable MPs virtually in debates. But there has been some resistance from the Leader of the House, Jacob Rees-Mogg, who wants to see MPs setting an example and operating in person as much as possible.
Layla, thank you.
Around 2 million people will be placed under Scotland's toughest coronavirus restrictions for 3 weeks from Friday.
Under the new Level 4 rules, non-essential shops, pubs, restaurants and gyms will have to close.
Let's speak to our reporter Alexandra Mackenzie, who's in Glasgow for us this morning. Good morning to you. So is the plan around this to try and get some sort of normality by Christmas?
Yeah, some kind of normality or just some kind of easing of restrictions that people can even have a chance of spending time with family and friends over that Christmas period after what has been a very difficult and stressful time for many. Now, the 2 million people or more than 2 million people that are affected are across 11 council areas, and that includes here in the city of Glasgow. That's across central Scotland and across Western Scotland. Now, the kinds of restrictions that we're going to see is that hospitality is going to close, gyms are going to close, and non-essential shops are going to close, and hairdressers will close as well. Schools will remain open. open, although the union, the EIS, has called for blended learning in level 4 areas. They're saying that the schools should not be fully open in level 4 areas. Now, there has been a mixed reaction to this. Obviously, it's a very difficult time for businesses, especially coming up to Christmas. But NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde put out a statement last night saying that they've seen a steady increase in the number of people going into hospital in the last few weeks. 700 people in hospital with COVID at the moment, and they're saying that their staff are under the same kind of pressure that they were at in the peak of the COVID first wave.
Sandra, thank you very much for that update. Thank you. Leading doctors have warned that hospitals will be overwhelmed unless the government imposes new restrictions in England after the lockdown is lifted in 2 weeks. The British Medical Association says the previous local tiered system is inadequate and does not contain the spread of the virus. It's created a blueprint with suggestions on how a new system should look. The government says its infection control guidance is constantly under review.
Donald Trump has sacked an official who rejected his unsubstantiated claims of voter fraud in the presidential election. Christopher Krebs was the head of the US Cybersecurity Agency. He described the election as the most secure in American history. Mr. Trump said he'd made a highly inaccurate statement.
Should we talk about skipping? Skipping rope sales apparently soared this year as we've been looking for ways to exercise at home. What if you have only one rope per household and 2 of you want to skip? You could try this.
This couple from Japan have just broken, wowzers, the world record for the most alternate skips by 2 people using a single rope in 30 seconds. They did 71 of them. Try that at home. The footage of their feet was released to celebrate Guinness World Record Day this year, and if skipping isn't your thing, you could have a go at this instead. This is Tunuke Orbit from London, bagging the record for the most cartwheels in 1 minute whilst wearing roller skates.
It's wearing roller skates, isn't it?
She managed 30 in a minute.
It makes me feel dizzy looking at her.
Imagine what's going on in your brain after that.
Oh my goodness.
See the headlines as they happen and watch BBC News live in the app and get the full story with bbc.co.uk/news. Follow the story for all the latest with BBC News.